the history of the Edomites part 2. And in this video, I'm going to be talking about the siege of Jerusalem. And I talked about it in part 1, but I'm really going to be talking about it in part 2 with more detail. And in part 1, what I was explaining is that the white man is not Esau as many things. So when you watch this video, you're not going to hear much about white people. You will, but you won't hear about them being Edomites, as some Israelite camps teach. And before anyone says I'm lying that the white man is Esau, please check out part 1, because I will not be arguing with anyone in the comments. And with that being said, I'm going to play a little clip from the last video to just give context for those who have not seen part 1, where I was basically explaining that a vast majority of the modern day Arabians are the children of Esau. So I'm just going to play that clip for those who did not see part 1. And these are the names of the sons of Ishmael by their names according to their generations. The firstborn of Ishmael, Nabijah. She was the one that married Esau. It says in Kedar, and Adbil, and Mibsan, and Misha, and Duma, and Massa, Hadar, and Tema. So pay attention to Duma and Tema. Jetur, Naphish, and Kedemah. One thing about the children of Esau is that they heavily mixed with the children of Ishmael. So the history of the Ishmaelites and the Edomites is deeply tied. That's why I said some descendants of Ishmael, of Ishmael, are Edomites. It says, thus dwelt Esau in Mount Seir. Esau is Edom, and I'm reading Genesis chapter 36, verse 8. And these are the generations of Esau, the father of the Edomites in Mount Seir. That's important for what we are about to read. Now, let's look at Isaiah chapter 21 and read verse 11. It says, the burden of Duma, and you can read about Duma, which was a descendant of Ishmael, back in Genesis. It says, he calls to me, or he calleth to me out of Mount Seir, or out of Seir. Watchmen, what of the night? Watchmen, what of the night? And what did we just read in Genesis chapter 36? Thus dwelt Esau in Mount Seir, and the descendants of the Edomites that lived in Mount Seir. The watchman said, the morning comes, and also the night. If you will inquire, you return come. The burden upon Arabia, in the forest in Arabia shall you lodge. So now he's being more specific, telling you who these descendants are, the Arabians, or you traveling companies of the Dinim, the inhabitants of the land of Tema, which we read about also in Genesis, brought water to him that was thirsty. They prevented him with their bread that fled. Their bread him that fled. For they fled from the swords, from the drawn sword, and from the bent bow, and from the grievousness of war. So now we're reading about the children of Esau, the Arabians or the Ishmaelites that mixed with Esau, making them Edomites. Verse 16, for thus hath the Lord said unto me, within a year, according to the years of an highly, and all the glory of Kedar shall fall. And Kedar was a descendant of who? Of Ishmael. Now, to clear up any doubt, in case anyone is still doubting this, we're going to read this in an easier translation. I'm going to read the same thing we just came from reading. This message came to me concerning Edom. Someone from Edom keeps calling to me, watchman, how much longer until morning? When will the night be over? The watchman replies, morning is coming, but night will return. If you wish to ask again, then come back and ask. The message came to me concerning Arabia. Now, when we read this in the KJV, it started off by mentioning Duma. And remember, Duma was a son of Ishmael. But like I mentioned, the Ishmaelites, they heavily mixed with the Edomites. So we know who this is talking about. These are Edomites. It says, this message came to me concerning Arabia. O caravans from Dedan, hide in the deserts of Arabia. O people of Tema, bring water to these thirsty people, food to these weary refugees. They have fled from the sword and from the drawn sword, from the bent bow and from the terrors of battle. And then it mentions Kedar again, which again, Kedar was a descendant of Ishmael. But like I keep saying, the Ishmaelites heavily mixed with the Edomites. Now we're going to talk about Herod the Great, king of Judea, who was born in 72 BC, and he was born in Edom. He was an Edomite. And a lot of people point this out, but what they don't mention is the fact that he was actually an Arab. Now, we're going to read about his family and early life. And this is going to be from Britannica.com. I'm also going to link it in the description in case anyone wants to read for themselves. It said Herod was born in southern Palestine. His father, Antipater, was an Edomite, a Semitic people identified by some scholars as Arab, who converted to Judaism in the 2nd century BCE. Antipater was a man of great influence and wealth who increased both by marrying the daughter of a noble from Petra in southwestern Jordan, at that time the capital of the rising Arab Nabatean kingdom. Thus, Herod was of Arab origin, although he was a practicing Jew. He wasn't a Jew by blood, but he converted to the religion of Judaism. Similar to the people that live in Israel now, they are not Jews by blood, but they even converted to the religion of Judaism. It's the same as what he did here. He wasn't an actual Jew, but he converted to a man-made religion known as Judaism. And we're also going to closely examine that Nabatean kingdom as well. We're going to examine that as we get into this video. Now we're going to read some more about Herod. It says, why one asks, would an heir of the Herod family who had been rulers of the Jews for over 100 years arm himself and fight against his own people? So the question is being asked, why would this man who was the king of the Jews, why would he want to fight against his own people, being king and being a Jew himself? And then it's going to answer. It says all the Herods always aligned themselves with Rome for the obvious reason that Rome was the genesis and the axis of their original and continuing power. Rome appointed Herod to be king over the Jews, to be king in Judea. It says, but an answer seldom given to the question is, the Jews were not really their people. The Herods were originally Arabs, and down through the generations, Arab blood, not Jewish blood, was prominent in them. None of the Herods, from Antipater, the Arab Idumean who founded the dynasty, to Agrippa II, who ended the dynasty, were Jews in blood or in loyalty. So they were not Jews in blood or in loyalty. That means they were not Jews through ancestry. They weren't related, and they weren't even Jews in loyalty, meaning they didn't support the children of Israel. They didn't support them at all. They didn't care about them. And notice how it referred to Antipater, who was the father of Herod, as being an Arab Idumean. Idumean is simply just another name for the children of Edom. Simply just another name for Esau or Edom. And now that we have read that they were not loyal to them at all, it's going to make sense why they did what they did during the siege of 70 AD. Now let's continue to read. It says, Agrippa II was the Herod, the last of the Herods, as it turned out, to have any regal claim on what came to be called the Holy Land. We read a lot of this Herod in the Bible. In Acts 26, both Agrippa and Herod were not Jewish names. Agrippa is a Roman name, and Herod is a Greek name. And I wanted to add, even though they had those names, their nationality was still Edomites, still Arabs. And that's what I just came from reading in this very same article. It says, this Herod, Agrippa II, son of Agrippa I, was the Herod who openly aligned himself with the Romans in the years 66 to 70, when Jerusalem and the ancient Jewish civilization were fighting for their very existence. So it says he aligned himself to fight against the Jews and sided with the Romans. This is exactly what they did. It says Agrippa II even gave his small army as an auxiliary force to the Romans during the battle for Jerusalem. In 67 AD, battle for Gamala, today Gamala in the Golan Heights, Agrippa II, his army, personally fought against the Jews side by side with the Roman general Vespasian and his forces. And we're going to continue to read about this, but we're going to read about it from a different source. Now we're going to read some more from a different source. It says the Herods were Arabs. Let us begin at the end with the destruction of an ancient Jerusalem by the Romans in 70 AD. And we just came from reading about that just now. It says Caesar, Emperor Vespasian, and we just came from reading about this person, gave orders to his son Titus that the Roman army should now demolish the entire city and temple, Jerusalem, just like the Messiah had said, that everything would be destroyed when you read Luke chapter 19. And he told the children of Israel what was going to come upon us. It says, was so thoroughly laid, even with the ground, by those that dug it up, to the foundation, that there was nothing left, that there was left nothing to make those that came there believe the city had ever been inhabited. So it was destroyed so much to the point that you couldn't even tell that someone had ever lived there. And we just read that the Herods, or the Arabians, the Edomites, what they had done is that they also fought side by side with the Romans against the Jews. They fought hand in hand to destroy the children of Israel. They were allies, or I mean, not allies with the children of Israel. They were allies with the Romans, and then they were against the Hebrews. Now let's observe this. It says in 37 BC, and this is an excerpt from the last 2 million years, the Roman Senate appointed Herod as king of the Jews. So the Romans, they allowed him to rule over the Israelites in their own land because at that time Israel was being oppressed. It says later he came to be known as Herod the Great, and we know that he was an Arab. He was an Idumean Arabian. Herod in turn established his own brother-in-law, the Idumean Costobarus, a priest of Kose, as ruler of Idumea in Gaza. This was the beginning of the Herodian dynasty. Henceforth, the Idumeans were reckoned as Jews. So the Arabs at this time, people believed they were Jews. And people still believe that they are the children of Israel to this day. There are people that argue that the land of Israel is their land. There are a lot of people that say, you know, Jesus wasn't black or white. He was Middle Eastern. He was an Arab. Long before the Europeans who call themselves Jews now were even considered Jews, these people, they were considered Jews, the Arabs. It says, and their land was counted as one of the 11 tetrarchies of Judea. But the union between them and the Jews proved of little blessing. Rather, they became an element of weakness to the Jews. And in a moment of need, they treacherously betrayed them to Rome. Just like we read. And Obadiah also said, you should have not reported those of his that did escape, because the Israelites that did escape from the Romans, what they started to do, the Idumeans, the Edomites, they reported it to the Romans so that we could be killed. It says by nature, they were cruel and barbarous, fierce and turbulent. At the time, the Romans under Titus besieged Jerusalem in 70 AD. The Idumeans, along with the Zealot party, early joined in the rebellion against the foe. Through the influence of John of Gashila, as Josephus informs us, 20,000 Idumeans were allowed access to the holy city, just like Obadiah mentioned them entering, only to fill the city with robbery and bloodshed. What did Obadiah say? He said, you should have never entered into the gate of my people. It says they spared nobody. It mentions all the plundering they did. That's why Joel chapter 3, it mentions the stolen riches. Now we're going to read Lamentations chapter 4 because certain events that happened during the siege is actually talked about in the Bible. It says, the hands of the pitiful women have sought their own children. They were their meat in the destruction of the daughter of my people. Now we're going to look at another scripture, the destruction of the daughter of my people, because Obadiah said something similar. Obadiah chapter 1 verse 12. But you should not have looked on the day of your brother, and he's speaking to the children of Edom, in the day that he became a stranger. Neither should you have rejoiced over the children of Israel in the day of their destruction. And Jeremiah talks about the destruction of the children of Israel in Lamentations. Neither should you have spoken proudly in the day of distress. And that day of distress is referring to the siege that took place in 70 AD. That was the day when Israel became a stranger in our own land. I'm going to play another short clip from part 1 that gives some detail about this. I also wanted to talk about the Limba very briefly. There was this group of people in Africa who were making the claim that they were Jews, that they were Israelites, and everyone said that they were lying until finally DNA tests were ran on these people, and it came out that they were actually descendants from the tribe of Levi, which I thought was very interesting. And then I also re-uploaded this video from Reclaiming the Throne, how they tested the skulls of Israelite slaves in Egypt and found that it was a direct match to Israelite slaves in America. So there's archaeological and DNA evidence to support this claim, even though people always tell us we're lying. But anyways, it says the presence of Hebrews in Africa is generally traced back to the siege of Jerusalem in 66 to 70 AD. This is what Obadiah was talking about. It says AD R.L. Windsor says it is estimated that during the period of Roman rule from Pompey to Julius, 1 million Hebrews fled into Africa, fleeing Roman persecution. 1 million Hebrews had fled to West Africa. It says Ella Hewley agrees that 66 to 70 AD Roman-Jewish war marked the peak of the persecution and the end of the original, pay attention to that word, original Hebrew Israelites as a nation. So it says it marked the end, meaning that the children of Israel have not been in Jerusalem since 70 AD. Because when you read Luke chapter 21 verse 24, Christ said that you will be led away captive throughout all of the nations. You will be taken out of this land, and then Jerusalem will be trodden down by the foreigners until. Now that we've seen that clip, we understand what day of destruction Obadiah was referring to here. He was saying you should have not looked on the day that your brother became a stranger. It even says, in the day that you stood on the other side, in the day that the strangers carried away captive his forces, and foreigners entered into his gates and cast lots upon Jerusalem, even you were as one of them. Verse 10, it mentions the violence of Edom against Israel, because remember, it talked about how they fought the Romans. They fought with the Romans against us to destroy us. Why? Because they desperately wanted that land. Ezekiel 36 even mentions how they say, aha, aha, we have this land in our possession. And that destruction is mentioned in Lamentations chapter 4 as well. Now we're going to go back to Lamentations chapter 4. Notice how it mentions the pitiful women have sodden their own children. What this is referring to, it probably could have been mentioning what was going on during the lifetime of Jeremiah as well. But I feel like this is also a prophecy of what was going to happen to Israel later on, simply because of what he says at the end of the chapter, and we're going to get to that. I believe he could have been talking about both at once, because that can happen with prophecy. Isaiah chapter 7 and Matthew chapter 1, for example. But anyways, it says the hands of the pitiful women have sodden their own children. And the reason why it says this is because when the siege took place in 70 AD, the Romans, they starved the children of Israel. And these words are really small, so you can't really see what it's saying unless you zoom up. But basically it explains how they were so hungry that they began to boil their own children and eat them, because the Romans, they starved them. In the book of Jeremiah, Jeremiah also talks about this as well. He mentions how they would be so hungry that they would have to go the route of eating their own children, which is very sad and tragic. And what's interesting is that when you read Jeremiah chapter 7, something else that I thought to throw out here, since we're mentioning Jeremiah, is that he said in Jeremiah chapter 7 verse 33 that the carcass of this people will be eaten by the fowls of the air, which is lynching. Because when a dead body is up, what do the birds do? They will be attracted to it while it's hanging on the tree. He also prophesied that we would be lynched. So I just thought that was something sad but interesting. That strange fruit is mentioned in the Bible. But anyways, let's skip to verse 12 of Lamentations chapter 4. It says, the kings of the earth and all the inhabitants of the world would not have believed that the adversary and the enemy should have entered into the gates of Jerusalem. In other words, he's saying the kings of the earth, no one would believe that with the way Jerusalem has the Most High God, that the enemy would be able to enter in. And we read in Obadiah that Edom, you should have not entered into the gates of your brother in the day of his calamity. But the reason why this happened is because of our disobedience against the Most High, that he allowed this to happen. Nevertheless, Scripture mentions how he will redeem his people and he will judge all those who have oppressed us.